So the piece I wrote in the BMJ about the increasing burden of bureaucracy associated with clinical research is really getting to a stage where it is becoming self-defeating. The increasing regulatory framework, or not so much the framework because the law hasn't changed particularly, but the way that's being interpreted by MRHA in this country, EMA, FDA, and how that's interpreted by the drug companies particularly, and the clinical research organisations has just led to an exponential increase in the paperwork, which has meant now that the time involved in putting patients into studies is so much that it's becoming quite difficult to actually run things. And unless you've got a significant number of people around you, I'm fortunate I've got a big team of people around me that can manage that paperwork side of things for me. But unless you've got that, it's be very, very difficult to actually run significant numbers of trials. And one of the problems is that paperwork takes so much time from your staff that you can't actually open other studies that will potentially benefit other patients. So you're putting a disproportionate amount of time of your staff into collecting unnecessary paperwork, and what you're getting away from is not actually putting patients in trials. So it is becoming self-defeating, and it's an increasing problem. And the piece I wrote in the BMJ was born of frustration and just documented some of the major problems we have here. And that letter was signed by over 1,000 people, and what we're hoping to do is use that as a catalyst to change some of the regulation, not so much the regulations, but the interpretation of the regulations, try and put some common sense back into research. I'm hoping I'll be successful. I think it's a challenge because it's a bit like turning a super tanker around, but if you don't try, then it's just going to become self-defeating. I think the scientific community is a bit hamstrung because basically clinical research is regulated, and ultimately it's under an EU directive. It's the law, so there are certain things that you have to comply with. It's the interpretation of that is the problem, and we can't say we're not going to do it. What we have to do is say to where it's coming from, you really don't need to do this. This isn't a patient safety issue. You know, you need to readdress why you're doing these things, because ultimately it's very expensive for companies to manage that kind of bureaucracy. It's very time intensive for us, so it's costing everybody, and so that's why the cost of clinical trials go up, that's why the cost of drugs go up. But ultimately fewer patients go into trials because you don't have the capacity to actually put them in because of this. So it's a burgeoning requirement. It's just going up and up and up and up. And I know some centres that are reducing the number of trials they're doing because they've got so much paperwork they're having to manage with existing studies, or even studies that are finished. I mean, there's lots of paperwork in trials that are not only finished but published, and the drug's got a license. It still goes on. So there's a lot of nonsense involved. So we need to try and just put some common sense back into it. That's not always easy with regulators particularly, but I think we have to try. Otherwise, we're in trouble.